Welcome to Blue Marble Defender story number 33, Everyday Bad Guys. Hello everyone, Helen Larkspur here. I received such a positive response from readers about my article entitled Everyday ETs, I thought to ask the same three Blue Marble Defenders to tell a previously unreported story about an evildoer they'd encounter at some time in their careers. Each graciously gave me an hour for the interview. Here's my first, and it's with the baseball player Rookie, who I'm sure is well known to you. Good morning, Rookie. Thanks for agreeing to tell us about an everyday bad guy. And here we go with Chapter 1, Harpiestan.
Glad to do it, Helen, even though I'll admit I'd rather be out fielding grounders. My story's about a dude called Hannibal Harpy. I believe this incident was the first time he ever got on Interpol's radar. It certainly was the first time we defenders heard about him. He lives in the country of Moldova in Eastern Europe. It's sometimes called Moldavia, and it formerly was part of the Soviet Union. In the eastern side of the country, there's a region called Transnistria. Moldova calls it an autonomous territorial unit, but the people who live there call it the Prednistrovyan Moldavian Republic. Now, no nation in the United Nations recognizes it as its own country, but Transnistria does have its own government, police, money, car license plates, and even its own national anthem. The Dnieper River separates Moldova from this self-declared country of Transnistria from the country of Ukraine. Harpy, who was born in Transnistria, decides to build an island on the Dnieper and declare it a country. Interesting, eh? Be born in a self-declared country, grow up, and build your own country. Nobody lives there except him and his henchmen. He calls it the Republic of Harpiestan. The Transnistrians couldn't very well complain about him building his own country, since their country is illegal, and the Ukrainians and the rest of the world just think Harpistan is a bad joke. Hannibal wrote the country's laws himself on an empty box of spaghetti he ripped apart, and it says, Harpistan Constitution. Hannibal does what he wants when he wants. His two main henchmen live part-time in his mansion, but are usually out somewhere in the world doing his dirty work. But Hannibal himself, well, he's an active, hands-on guy, and he likes to do a lot of nasty work. I first heard about all this from my uncle Amerigo. It started on a beautiful summer day when I was swanning around in the Roman ruins and beaches of Pula on Croatia's Istrian Peninsula. He phoned and told me one of his small satellites had picked up a plume of radioactivity in the Dnieper River and asked me to pop over and check it out. I did a quick check on my smartphone and realized that was more than 1,600 kilometers and a day's drive away. I told him I'd be happy to arrive there in a week after visiting Zagreb, Budapest, Chisinau along the way, but since radioactive river pollution was likely an urgent matter, I asked if he could help out. I don't know how he does these things, but in half an hour, a jet helicopter landed on a dock at the edge of town, and I climbed aboard. The chopper was super noisy, and a 3-hour ride wasn't my favorite, but Uncle Amerigo had told the pilot to load on a huge bag of popcorn, and I chomped away for most of the trip. As we approached the Dnieper River, I asked the pilot to turn on the chopper's Geiger counter, and we flew low over the coordinates Amerigo had given me. We picked up measurements above the level of normal background radiation, but not the strong plume Amerigo had found. So we decided to circle, and we circled the entire width of the river and continued downstream for a kilometer. Slightly unusual amount of radiation was present in the whole area, but it wasn't nearly as bad as we expected. By now it was late in the day, so I asked the pilot, a former British Royal Marine named Lance, to head to Terraspal, that's its airport, so that we could catch a taxi into town and, hey, spend the grand evening at Transnistria's capital. We stayed at the old Terraspal, a place I'd picked off the web, thinking it was an old hotel in the center of town. Well, it was old, and it was in the center, but it was an apartment in a private home, kind of more like a hostel. That was okay. Better than okay, because the very pleasant owners told Lance and me several interesting stories about smuggling and the East-West intrigue that goes on in Transnistria. They also confirmed the island just upriver from where Amerigo had spotted the radioactive plume, well, that was less than a year old. They knew the name Hannibal Harpy, but couldn't or wouldn't tell more. He was the owner. If I read the lady's expression right, my interest in the island and in Harpy really worried her. Lance and I ate dinner at a local restaurant, and we were pleased with our meal. It started with zema, a Moldovan chicken noodle soup, followed by sarmale, stuffed cabbage rolls, and ended with ciperi umbrute, stuffed bell peppers. Following dinner, Lance and I played chess in my room until after dark. He was ready for bed, but I convinced him to fly us out to the river again, and gosh, I'm glad I did. The Geiger counter went crazy. There was no reading upstream from the island, but shortly downstream, it showed a huge radiation spike, and gradually that spike declined over the following 2 kilometers. Something was rotten here, and I promised the old blue marble I'd get to the bottom of it. We returned to our hostel and slept well despite the worrisome findings. In the morning, we continued our tour of Moldovan cuisine when our hosts served us their traditional breakfast called mamalia, cornmeal mush with sheep cheese, sausage, fried onions, and pastry. It was tasty. After breakfast, I brushed aside my instinct to report the pollution to the local police, and I decided to handle the matter myself. I know, you might not think this was wise, but I figured when you're in a place that makes up its own laws, you might as well take the law into your own hands. We flew directly to the island. It was about 150 meters wide and maybe 250 meters long, and I was impressed by the temerity of the individual who had created it. We looped it twice around at only about 100 meters altitude to make sure we knew the lay of the land, and I guess also to make sure we knew the owner was aware we were coming. A marble mansion sat on the upstream side and an industrial metal building on the downstream side. The grass and shrubs were clearly new and left plenty of space to set down the chopper. Lance cut the engine, and we waited a couple of minutes to see if someone would come out to greet us. No one did, so we set off toward the house. I was a split second away from placing my finger on the doorbell when it opened, revealing a giant head with a man attached. It held a fat cigar in the side of its mouth, and when it turned toward me, the cigar stopped just centimeters from my nose. A smell hit me. Well, I'll tell you what. It was first the smell of the smoke, but its companion smell, that one of boiled cabbage and sausage, almost made my eyelashes wilt. Speechless, I leaned back and would have fallen off the step if Lance hadn't caught me. Hey, that cigar stayed in place, and the big gnarled head snarled, "What do you want, pissant?" The head was covered in short but wiry, pointy hair, went in every direction. The head's lips were greasy, like he'd been eating without benefit of a fork, and from the looks of it, he'd been eating at the same time as he chopped that fat, half-wet cigar. The head glanced at Lance, then at me. The attached man took the cigar from the giant head's mouth. It opened wide with its top teeth showing, and the nose wrinkled as though the attached man was just now detecting that nasty cabbage smell. Before he could say another word, I said in a perhaps too loud voice, "We're here to tell you to stop sending radioactive material into the river, and stop it now." The head swiveled a 180-degree tour of the island. The attached man raised his palms, and the head said, "I ain't polluting nothing. Nothing. Got it? Now get out of here. I make the laws on this island. I'm putting you two in a pit out there in that shed if you don't beat it. Now get going." My blood was up and I yelled, "You slimeball! You might not be polluting the river at this minute, but you spew radioactive waste out at night. I have evidence." He yelled back and covered me with cabbage breath. "Have anything you want, pissant. But I make the laws in this country, and I say you're trespassing. Beat it, or I'll sick my dogs on you and throw you in the pit." The sound of big, vicious, barking dogs came through the door. I looked over my shoulder. Well, and then I saw Lance, and I saw him jerking his thumb toward the chopper. We'd walked a few steps when I turned, and I couldn't stand that guy, and I yelled back, "Any laws you might claim to have on this pile of dirt are overridden by the UN's 1997 law on international water courses. Those guys will tie you up in knots." "Not gonna happen, pissant. I ain't signed no treaty, and I'm not gonna do exactly what I please. Now kiss off and don't come back." Well, Lance flew us back to the airport. We took a taxi to the hotel where the landlady invited us into the kitchen. She served us coffee and a plate of long sperati cookies and sat down to join us. When she asked how our business had gone, I told her what had happened. Her face darkened. She stood quickly and walked from the kitchen, calling out, "Bogdan," followed by words we couldn't understand. Her husband soon arrived and joined us at the table. He looked at Lance and at me, and then down into his coffee cup. He spoke slowly, which helped us better understand his deep voice and heavily accented English. When we first met, I didn't want to become involved with anything to do with that island out there. But now that I understand your intentions, I'll pass on what I know. Like many locals who do not have enough work, I agreed to take money from that man Harpy to help build his island and its infrastructure. My task was to lay 3 lines of underground pipe, one from the island's edge on the Transnistria side here, and one from far over to the Ukraine side, and then one down the downstream island's tip. He looked at us to make sure we understood and then continued. The hardest part of the job was to terminate the 3 pipes at precisely the same spot, so the 2 from the 2 sides could link to the one going downstream. I asked Harpy what the pipes were for, but he wouldn't tell me. I was suspicious of the guy's intentions, so I insisted. Well, he fired me. He fired me for asking. And he put me on a boat off the island 5 minutes later. A friend of mine who was working to build that marble mansion told me Harpy had him build a steel shed over the place where the 3 pipes came together. Bogdan went on to tell us the same friend told him Harpy had hired another crew to lay an underwater pipe from a chemical factory in Transnistria and connect it to Bogdan's pipe at the island's edge, and then connect that one to the downstream pipe inside the shed. The link had first been operated 2 days ago. The underwater pipe from Ukraine had been connected to the island yesterday, but was not yet operational. That pipe, the Ukraine pipe, led to a nuclear power plant. Bogdan added, "I know the material flowing through the pipe from our side is toxic, and I've heard the one from Ukraine will be worse. I also heard Harpy is being paid enormous amounts of money to take in these pollutants. He bent his head, shook it, and reached for his wife's hand. He looked very sorrowful. I thanked our host and hostess, and as I took the stairs to my room, I developed a plan. After running it past Lance and phoning Amerigo for his agreement, I made it to a plumbing supply store before they closed for the day and bought a big sack of things. At sunset, Lance and I checked out from the hostel and took the chopper to the island just after full darkness arrived. Lance came in low over the water, set the bird down behind the steel industrial building, and stayed in the cockpit as lookout while I trundled my newly purchased sack of tools to the building's door. Without shining a light, I located its padlock, slipped a pair of long-handled bolt cutters from the bag, and removed the lock. Fortunately, I turned on my miner's headlamp before I took the first step inside because the door opened at the pit Hannibal had threatened to drop us into. I could see the pipes Bogdan had told us about way deep at its base. I tiptoed around the pit to the aluminum ladder on the other side and descended with my tool bag. The 15-centimeter pipe from the Transnistria side, well, it was equipped with a pump and a timer and connected to the much larger 25-centimeter downstream pipe. The three-way coupling's third port was covered by a screw cap, as was the 15-centimeter pipe from Ukraine that sat next to it with its pump and timer already installed. Connecting those two pipes, apparently the last connection, well, that'd be a pretty simple matter. I shined my headlight on the Transnistrian pipe's timer. The valve was set to open at 10 o'clock p.m. I'll tell you, boy, that torqued me up. I had only 5 minutes to pull off my plan. I grabbed a can of lubricant from the bag and sprayed the cap of the not yet connected third coupling port. Then I hauled out a huge wrench, and I adjusted it to fit the cap tightly. I straddled the pipe and jerked the wrench counterclockwise with all my strength. It screeched, but moved a couple of millimeters. The next pull went a full half turn, and from then on it was easy. When the cap came off, a small amount of some super nasty smelling liquid drained out and into the pit. I jumped out of its way and the flow quickly stopped, but I'd done my work. Time was up, and more of that poison would belch out any second. I ditched my wrench, darted for the ladder, and flew up it. Well, Lance had to put it to another assignment, so he dropped me off in Vienna at the airport. I went into town, spent a night in a fancy hotel, ate Viennese pastries for breakfast, and trained it back to the beautiful beaches of Croatia. A couple of texts arrived from Amerigo along the way. His satellite cameras showed the entire Harpiestan island had been flooded by toxic radioactive waste the evening before. Transnistria's TV station reported Hannibal had been forced to climb a rope ladder to a police helicopter when the life-threatening pollutants surrounded his mansion. Harpy was now being held for endangering public health by the International Criminal Court in The Hague, Netherlands. Others in Transnistria and Ukraine had been arrested. Environmental specialists were assessing the risks posed by the polluted rogue island nation of Harpiestan, and the governments of Moldova and Ukraine were evaluating a proposal to demolish the island. So, Helen, that's my little story. Hope your readers find it interesting.